So good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I'm really excited to do this particular topic. It's something that is certainly near and dear to my heart. It's something that we've been thinking about, probably like many of you, since we started that initial AB 86 planning in our regions. And of course, it's becoming more topical and more interesting now with the LAO report talking about measuring consortia based on post-secondary transitions. So I'm going to just take us through our objectives for today. So we've got three objectives that we'll take a look at today. First of all, we want to explore the structures that will support and facilitate student post-secondary transitions. We're going to examine several different elements of two different program models. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing, and Emma will have a chance to talk about what she's doing. And then we'll have a chance to consider some of the potential strategies that we've heard about and hear from some of you about things that you might be able to implement, or maybe things that you're already implementing that are working. So as we take it through this, I think I'll turn things over to Emma here.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen, and welcome everybody. Is my sound better?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have made some adjustments. And so let's start off by first defining what transition is. And I know we're a big group, but I want you to put in the chat, 3 to 5 words on what comes to mind when you hear the word transition. Okay, change. Next steps, advancement, placement, new challenges, move to something else. Support, moving forward, growing, matriculation, moving on, growth, transformation, graduation. Those are all some great words. Okay. And so Kathleen, today we'll be walking you through what the transition pathways we have are, but keep all of your definitions and words in mind.
Thanks, Emma. So we wanted to start out talking a little bit about what does the research say about how we support post-secondary transitions. And so there have been a lot of different research studies about this, about college readiness, but there hasn't been a lot of research on adults and how are we supporting adults in making these transitions. So this particular study, the Adult Transitions Longitudinal Study, came to us from the New England ABE to College Transition, and it looked at, it was a study of 227 students who entered 11 different adult education programs. And then the study followed these 227 students over a period of 4 years to really try to look at what were the strategies that were the most effective in helping students successfully transition. So we've kind of boiled this down into 6 different promising practices. And so none of these are particularly earth-shattering, you'll see. So the first thing is strengthening relationships between post-secondary institutions and adult education programs. The second is aligning curriculum. The third is to share data, to enter into data sharing agreements. The fourth is providing targeted student support. The fifth is integrating college readiness skills into our adult education curriculum. And then finally, implementing learner goal setting. So I'm sure that each of us is doing many of these things already. And so it's just a way of maybe thinking about how are we doing these with more intention, and how are we building these structures to allow these things to happen in order to help support students to that next level. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about our consortium. And so I am part of the Education to Career Network, which is in North San Diego County. We are a 6-member district consortium. And we cover a really large area in North San Diego County. It's over 2,500 square miles. So it includes rural areas, it includes suburban areas and urban areas in North San Diego County. So if you're familiar with San Diego, let me just describe to you. In the north, we go all the way to that Temecula border. So it includes Valley Center, Palma, and Fallbrook. In the west, we go all the way to Camp Pendleton. In the east, we go to Borrego Springs and Julian. And in the south, we go to parts of North San Diego, the city of North San Diego. So we'd be looking at the dividing line of Scripps Poway Parkway and the 56. So it's a really large area. And so as we work together, these 6-member districts, we started, again, way back when we were doing those. And I saw, Neil, your comment about, woohoo, a charter member for AB 86. Yeah, so these were some of the strategies that we thought about from the very beginning, is how are we structuring things to support for what we were then thinking about with seamless transitions for students. So some of the things we structured in our consortium, we started out with these common positions. And so we have each of our larger agencies has a career advisor. Each one of us has somebody on our staff that is designated as a career advisor. And each one of us has somebody on our staff who is a transition specialist. So we have those common positions at 4 of our larger schools. Then we also have shared positions. So we have a data coordinator, for example, and that person is hired by Escondido. We have a partnerships coordinator, and that person is hired by Poway. We have a support counselor for students with disabilities. That person's hired by Vista. We have a technology integration specialist. That person's hired by Poway. And then we have an accountant that's is hired by our fiscal agent. We have an administrative assistant who is a consultant hired by our fiscal agent. And then we have a curriculum and planning consultant also hired by our fiscal agent. So when we think about those 6 promising practices and we think about how some of those promising practices come into play here, what I see here are strengthening relationships, providing targeted student support, and even learner goal setting with some of these common positions. And so in terms of strengthening relationships, when we have shared positions that are going in and supporting each one of our school sites, they're really learning about one another. And when we have the common positions, we're bringing people together in what we call a community of practice. We have another structure that has supported us, and that is this collaborative curriculum alignment. So about 5 years ago, we started with a project that we called collaborative curriculum alignment. And the very first year that we did this, we had pretty extraordinary results. We had 100 courses across 8 different disciplines that were aligned with 1 or more schools. So we felt like, wow, that's that's an amazing process. And we did this over the summer where we had teachers coming together, bringing what we were looking at very high level overviews of their courses. And we were deeming things as either equivalent or as a course in a sequence. So in other words, we were aligning either for placement or aligning for credit. And so as we did this project, we've continued on, and this work is what I would say really set the stage for what we're now doing with multi-agency PLCs. So we're bringing our our teachers, our faculty from different agencies together to look at student data and start to think about maybe how are you delivering this and what are the results that you're getting with this, so that we're creating just more of a collaborative relationship. So again, if I think back to those 6 promising practices, what I see with this is obviously the aligning curriculum that stands out here, but also the strengthening relationships. Sharing data is certainly a part of this. And then the integrating college readiness skills into adult education curriculum. So those start to become part of this work with collaborative curriculum alignment. So the next structure that we put in place is this data sharing. So I've talked a little bit about this already. So we have this shared position, a data coordinator, and that person is pulling data for us across the consortium. We also are engaging in a quarterly data dialogue with our entire consortium. So we're looking at data across our whole system. So we can see, for example, like, wow, Vista is really crushing it with their persistence rates. What are they doing in Vista? We want to know what Vista is doing. And so we can pay attention to some of those things and learn from one another. So it's kind of like a PLC at a very high level for us. And then this data sharing agreement, this was another piece that is part of our MOA, our memorandum of agreement. When we all formed our consortium, we agreed that we would share data. And so one of the things our data coordinator has helped us do is to do a data match with our community college, Palomar College in our case, so that we can see which ones of our adult education students are also enrolled in Palomar College or left us and enrolled in Palomar College. And so doing that data match has been a really interesting data point for us. And then this whole idea of learner goal setting, and what are we doing? What are the structures that we're putting in place with learner goal setting? Well, we talked about these common positions of the career advisors. So we have those in place. We also created an individualized student plan, an education and career plan. And this is something that we're using in each of our agencies across our consortium. And so this is something that we can talk about. If a student moves from one place to another, we know that students have thought about what they're doing next. And then we also implemented some tutoring, some targeted tutoring for students. So each one of our adult schools receives funding from our consortium CAPE funds to provide targeted tutoring for students that need extra assistance. So when I think about these particular structures, and then I think about those 6 promising practices, what I see at play here are providing the targeted student support, integrating college readiness skills into the adult education curriculum, and then implementing that learner goal setting. So I think that when we came up with these things in our consortium, we weren't necessarily designing structures that we thought were aligned with the research per se, because that research didn't exist yet. That Atlas, that Atlas report hadn't been published at the time that we were designing these structures. So when I saw the report, I thought, oh, we have a lot of these elements in place. That's very promising. And so what I will say is we've got the structures in place, and now we're kind of waiting to see some of the results. I think we're waiting to really feel like we're building traction and that we're seeing different results. So last November, I had this opportunity to go to the CCAE South Coast and Southern Sections Conference in Palm Springs. And I had the opportunity to see Emma Diaz speak, and she was talking about supporting student transitions. And she was a facilitator of a panel where she had community college folks and adult school folks talking about how they were working together to really bring about results. And I was completely blown away because this is something that we've been working on for a long time. We have these great structures in place, but I don't think we've seen the results that Emma and her consortium have seen. And so I immediately said, Emma, I want to know more about what it is that you're doing and how are you making it work? So I talked her into doing this with me today so we could share it with all of you. But I'm going to turn things over to Emma now, and then I'll come back and join you in a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen, for that. And yes, this came about in a dialogue with Kathleen at CCAE because we were presenting as a panel. And so we've done two separate presentations in the past where we do one on the actual counseling pathway of what our transition counselors do. And then we've talked about now how we built that. So this is kind of an overview in 20 minutes of the last 8 years. And so I'll start by talking about our consortium, because I know across the state at the beginning, there was, some frustration as to wanting more guidance, but I'll say there was wisdom in allowing every region to create what worked for them. What works for us in our region in San Bernardino, and again, we have 5 adult ed consortia within our county. Us specifically, San Bernardino, we go by the Inland Adult Education Consortium to be more inclusive of all of our partners. We have 2 colleges, we have 5 K-12s, and we have a county office of ed that participates. So we have a total of 8 voting members. And we are a little more structured in the sense of we do have a hierarchy where we have an executive committee, which is made up of the 5 superintendents and 2 college presidents. And then we have myself in the middle as a director, a dedicated director. And then we have a steering committee, which is made up of the principals of each of the sites that make recommendations. And then we have work groups, or as we call them, the hubs, which are community partners and so forth. So that's the structure for us within the Inland Empire. There are a total of 9 consortia, adult ed consortia, but San Bernardino County itself is the largest county geographically in the U.S. So we have our own challenges of having a mix actually within our area of both, very, very urban and rural areas. So we have tried to address the concerns of our transitioning students through that. So I'll go to the next slide, Kathleen. So how did we do it? So going back 8 years ago, it'll actually be 9 years this April that I started. I've been the director of the consortium with the beginning of AB 86. And so at the beginning, when we began the conversations about how do we build a regional plan, we started with looking at what is already existing in our county. And our county is really big on following the cradle to career roadmap. And so we used this and then said, where does adult ed fall into all of this and transition services? So we used this structure to begin the dialogue, as well as we had a county vision. And that's how we started with that. I'll go to the next slide, please. So we took that, and I'll talk about the structure. These are kind of the 3 phases or 3 different areas that I'll share information on. The first one was building that foundation. This is where we had the AB 86 phase. We were tasked with creating that regional plan around the 7 objectives, that AB 86 had, seamless transition being one of them. It began with building trust. That's really what we intended to do with the facilitation method that we used, which was really key and important for us. And then the results of that dialogue, the results of the conversation in the room is what was captured in actual documentation. And that became part of the regional and then the strategic plan that we developed, which we are now implementing. And I do have some data to show you at the end on what that transition program looks like. The middle part is the partnership itself. And that's what Kathleen happened to hear. How have we carried forth with the partnership? And that's implementation of the strategic plan that we developed all together. It was building more trust. I can't express how much trust and relationships are such a key part of anything that we've done within our consortium, because as you know, people change, people come and go, people leave. And so it's a continuous building of trust, building of that relationship, and then having open communication. We know there are very sensitive topics, and I'll talk about some of those sensitive areas we had to discuss going into this partnership. And then the last section that I'll talk about is the actual transition model program. We submitted for CAPE as a model program. In 2021, it was recognized as a transition model program in 2021. So, and that was, I'll talk about the hiring of our counselors, and then the development of the actual transition pathway and what they do to address the barriers to transition, which is kind of where we are. And I'll show you the data. I know that across the state, there's a lot of dialogue about the MIS system. I know at the community college does not capture all the information. So I'll show you how we developed some kind of a system to be able to capture and show results. So I'll go to the next slide. So the first section was that AB 86 phase. And so what we did back in March of 2015, when we submitted this, is we chose student transition to post-secondary and employment as a priority of our specific consortium. We actually dedicated a work group to this. That's how it all began. And we brought in the second bullet is building that trust, setting the foundation for all of the activity. And what we did is we brought in site administrators, principals, vice principals. We brought counselors, both from the community college and from adult ed, into the room to be able to talk about what does it look like for transition services in our area. Now, how we did that was unique in the sense of I brought in an independent facilitator, somebody that could help us with the dialogue, because we knew there were sensitive topics. We knew we were all just meeting each other, for some people for the very first time in many years across all the different systems, because we had community partners. At that point, we had the ROPs, we had community college, and we had K-12. All of us in the room, all of us bringing in, our hat of where we worked. And so we needed to first be able to say, let's focus on what brings us to the commonality as opposed to what makes us different. So we used top facilitation, which is the technology of participation. And that's a method that we used specifically in each one of our meetings. So I'll show you what that looked like in the next slide. So what we did is we came up with a set of questions, because that's what facilitation does. Some of us work with consultants as well. Consultants have knowledge and content, where a facilitator brings in the right questions. And we needed to first find out and get on the same page and reach a consensus of what does our region see in transition. So I'll say the very first meeting, this was the question that everybody in the room answered. What barriers stand in the way of providing effective transition services throughout our region? So we first identified what those barriers were. That was a 4-hour meeting. It was facilitated. And again, the method we use this really big blue sticky wall, which is really cool. Everybody puts their ideas up, so nobody's voice gets left out of the dialogue. Then we reach a consensus on each one of those meetings. And then that consensus begins the part of creating our strategic plan. The second question we asked in our second meeting was, what do we want to see in place in 5 years as a result of our action? Again, this was in the AB 86 phase before we had the template of either a 3-year plan or an annual plan. So we did a 5-year vision. After the state decided they were going to do 3-year annual plan through the 3-year plans. And so we were able to tailor it afterward to a 3-year strategic plan instead of a 5-year. But we started with the 5-year vision of what does this look like? Our third meeting was, what practical actions can we take to deal with those contradictions of moving forward? Because many times we know there are barriers, and we wanted to really identify, is it a barrier or an actual perceived barrier that we think is there? So in that dialogue is really where the magic happens, and where we're able to, at the end of each meeting, come to a consensus of the result of that particular meeting. So then we can move forward with implementation of a plan afterward. And then in our fourth meeting was, what will our specific measurable accomplishments be over the first 12 months? So we actually came up with a strategic plan that actually had the quarters of a year, who was responsible for it, and what the outcome looked like. So all of that really helped me as a director, because I know that people change, people come and go. That's my onboarding document. I use that regional plan to onboard people, and I welcome them to being part of what we do. So what these facilitated meetings resulted in was in that creation of a vision for us in this transition pathway. What it did is it gets buy-in from individuals, because you're all in the room having this dialogue. We had definitely sensitive dialogue about transitioning students who might not be ready yet. and the college, and we know the terminology is you don't want to take students before they're ready. No one is stealing the students. So we had to have that dialogue, as difficult as it is, as embarrassing as it might be. We had to put that out there so that way we can all move past it. Once we were able to move past that, we were able to build this pathway in a way where everybody was equal. The importance of having the community college counselors in that role was also part of the discussion, because there was a discussion of where would they be housed, what would they be doing. So in this case, because students were transitioning to post-secondary, we thought that the best at that time would be to have community college counselors be the ones advising, because of the systems, because of access to student data, and so forth. So that was part of building the foundation. So I'll go to the next slide, Kathleen. So again, that strategic plan really fed into the action plan and became the regional plan. But the overarching for us was we work under collective impact. And what collective impact says is no one entity can make lasting social change on their own. We had to work together, and we had to find what our strengths were and allow each one of the individual, whether it was a district, whether it was a site, to be able to be the best they were at that. So that way we can all move together and not have duplication of efforts. Go to the next one. And so now going into that middle section I showed you on the partnership, this is what Kathleen saw the presentation on, is where are we in the partnership and the implementation of that strategic plan. And I'll say it takes a commitment to implement something. What you're hearing about is 8 years worth of us working together. And again, building more trust. The more trust you have, the easier it is to overcome those bumps in the road. And I'll say communication is another really important one. And we all know communication is important, but when you're working with entities that are not necessarily all the same, it's even more. And I'll just say 2 quick examples of building this transition of hosting non-employees at your campus is they see life differently, they work very differently. We had situations that I had to come in as a director to step in and say, you know what, we have MOUs in place to be able to overcome this on a larger level. But I'll say it was even, my transition counselor at the beginning was saying, they're asking me for my vacation schedule. They're asking me that, when I call in sick, I need to notify somebody. And and it becomes sensitive because they're not an employee of that site. So those are the kinds of dialogues that need to happen, which we're not always comfortable with happening. Those sensitive topics about staying out of I'm going to say it, the drama of any one place. Some places have individuals who are just looking for things to be doing outside of work. And I said, you're an employee of the college hosted at a site, but you need to be cautious as well. So those are sensitive dialogues that people don't always tell you need to have. But I'll say in building the partnership, we had to have those out in the open and be able to dialogue and be able to reach consensus on how we would do things so that employees would not feel uncomfortable going to multiple sites. I'll go to the next one, Kathleen. So what does it look like today? Again, it's been 8 years of this. What it looks like today for us, we did we have 2 full-time counselors right now. We're actually in the process of hiring 2 more, one for one site at San Bernardino Valley College, another one for Crafton Hills College. Both positions are flying right now. And that's because both of our counselors at the Valley College location had about three weeks worth of a wait for students to see them. And that's how we knew. That's part of the data, is monitoring how long does it take students before they could see a counselor. And that was one of the things we monitored. The other thing we monitored was the amount of work they do, which I'll show you on a later slide, how we developed some kind of a system, absent having a statewide system, to be able to capture what really goes into a transition. So the development and implementation of our transition pathway, what it looks like for us today, having the 2 dedicated full-time counselors that we have right now, is they do work one-on-one with adults at adult ed sites. So they alternate. One goes to one day, one goes to another day, and they do 8-hour days at each site where they visit. They actually meet with students. They have appointments that are set because each one of our K-12 adult sites has a dedicated counselor. And so that counselor works with our transition counselors to be able to set up. They have a Google spreadsheet where they set appointments for them. Our counselors also use, I think, a system called Candly, if I'm saying it right, or Calendarly. And students get the link and they're able to set appointments in half-hour slots with them. They also provide workshops. They go regularly to our adult ed sites, and they work with the classroom teachers to also come into their classrooms to present on the services that we offer for transition. As well as they teach college level courses at the adult ed sites. We currently have one right now that is 2 nights a week. It's an actual counseling credit level course through dual enrollment at one of our adult ed sites. So all of this came up, and every semester we reevaluate what is happening to make sure that it is what the students need. And if not, we make adjustments to it. So this, again, the model itself is something that our transition counselors have been doing for at least 3 to 4 years now, and we've been making adjustments to it. And I think the next slide has some data that I do want to share with you, at least how we're collecting it. So Neil, I want you to cover your ears. Oh no, this is not the data one. This is actually on part of what we do. And our transition counselors have actually had presentations at multiple conferences. We've presented at, CCAE, we've presented at the Cape Summit, we've presented for COABE, we've presented at different levels. Each one of these little subject boxes is what our transition counselors will work with students to help overcome those barriers to transition. Now, not everybody needs the same one, but I'll tell you, it's quite a lengthy presentation, so I'm only doing the overview of the subsections, but each one of these has what the barrier is, and then the strategy to help the student overcome that barrier. And it's a presentation we've done, like I said, multiple times. And I'll go to the next slide, Kathleen, because I think that this is where I know a lot of people have more questions, and I'll tell you how we came about. This is just the transition data for one of the colleges, San Bernardino Valley College, because we have a vacancy at the other college right now. So I'll focus in just on this data. What this is actually what we call student contacts or touch points, because as all of you know, our adult ed students have situations where they need a lot more help than just a 1-hour session with the counselor. So what we developed in our SARS system was the different areas. So what you see on the right-hand side are the triple SP, which is our matriculation completion process. And this is what all students need to do. So if you see there, we have how many students they helped in 1 year with the application process, how many students needed help with the orientation process. And actually one of our counselors translated the orientation into Spanish to help more students get through that. The placement, developing of an education plan, how many of them were helped with registration, and how many are continuing, meaning they've maybe already had matriculated to the college, they needed help enrolling maybe for the next semester. So that's an ongoing student. So we were trying to capture all of the different services that the counselors are offering, because we know it takes a lot longer than just 1 half-hour session to be able to get a student through each one of those different areas. On the left-hand side is I wanted to show you what it looks like over the years. And so on that top box on the left-hand side, we have the unduplicated total. And that was 546 students that actually matriculated to the college in 1 year. And then on the bottom, I have what it looks like year over year but those are just the touch points. And the reason why I say the contact points is because it takes a lot of hours to work with students who have multiple barriers. So our counselors are trying to track as much. And as you could see in 22-23, between the two of them, they've already are close to almost what they did for an entire year the previous year. And so we're making adjustments as we go, because we're trying to figure out, even during the pandemic in 2020-21, we had a lot less counseling sessions. And what I found out as I started talking to the counselors is that sessions were taking longer. Students needed to unpack more of their emotion of what was happening before they could focus on education pathways. So as a structure, we needed to make adjustments. And that's how, using this data, I was able to go back to our consortium and say, we need to hire a third counselor, because between the two of them, right now, there's a 3-week wait period for them to be able to be connected with students. So I didn't think that was a good thing. If we're trying to continuously build this program, build momentum, we needed to make sure that we were responsive as well. So right now we're in the process of flying 2 positions. So we'll have a total of 4 transition counselors by the end of this year. that will all be working around these areas of helping students with application, orientation, placement, the ed plan and registration. And I like the approach that they do even with their workshops, because they always go in and say, if there's anything that you're going to remember about this presentation, it's our contact info. You don't have to do any of this part alone. So they walk the students through each one of these. And I'm looking at the questions, trying to make sure I can answer some of these.
Yeah, so Janae was asking, how was the data collected? Was it collected and reported by counselors? And then Kelly asked, what system or process did you use to collect the data?
Yes. So it's both. We use the SARS system, and in the SARS system, which is a community college software, we created subsections of each one of these. So anytime an application was worked on with the student, they would go in there to put that information. At the end of any time period, which could be a semester or a year, I could go in and I could pull in the SARS system, the name of the counselor, and it'll show me all of this data. The other side, though, that one is part of our massive, we call it a monster of a spreadsheet that the transition counselors keep every time they work with the student. And again, the reason why we do it like this is because we know at the state level, they're going to be matching some of those students in the transition of going from non-credit to credit or adult ed to credit. But in the meantime, in order for me to justify, I always say I need to justify our salaries in that case of, you know what, I need to show what we're doing. This was the best way for us. And it does take time to be able to do this. I always have our transition counselors spend a day or two working on the data. So that way we can have something representative to show our executive body, to show our steering committee, but then as well at the local level to be able to make adjustments as we go. So it's a combination of an internal spreadsheet as well as the SARS system. But we had to make the SARS system kind of adapt to what we needed and created an adult ed tab in SARS to be able to pull that data.
So another question that came up, Emma, and you may have just addressed this, was does it capture data only for students that counselors worked with, or do you have a way to capture all transitions?
So Neil is saying Cape Data matches 9 months after the end of the program year. So you do need your own real-time process. That was why we did it. Let me make sure I answer your question though, Kathleen. You were saying, trying to see the
Michelle had asked, does this just capture data for students that counselors work with or any student that transitioned?
This is just the one that our counselors work with. And the other thing that we try to do is when they do workshops, we have sign-in sheets for workshops and we add those in because we know that they're technically working with them, but they might not have had a transition yet. So that's the other thing we do is we do keep sign-in sheets from all of the workshops that they do in classes and for the different sites.
And Michelle, I might just add, so this data sharing agreement that we have where we're doing a data match with the college ourselves, it might also be a way to capture students that you don't know about or your counselors don't know about. So I'm going to push us forward, Emma.
That's it. Yeah, I think that was the last one for me.
So the next thing we wanted to do is take a little time and hear from you. So we're at 2:50, and of course we have until 3 o'clock, but I told Sharice we'd give her 2 minutes at the end to wrap things up. So we are just wondering, and you can unmute and share, or you can type in the chat, do any of the ideas that we've talked about today resonate with you? And do you have something that you're using right now that's really working that you'd want to share with the group? Our little intimate group of 100. So Emma, it looks like we're still getting some data questions. So there's a question, do you, is the internal spreadsheet a G sheet or Excel?
It's an Excel.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also use a lot of, I know on the K-12 side, they use a lot of Google. So they have a Google spreadsheet as well on their end. So they schedule many times adult ed students within their campuses to meet with our transition counselors on the days that they're there. So we do have that as well that goes back and forth.
Oh, so John, finally somebody responded to the question. So now we'll put you on the spot. What did you hear that you think might, is there one idea that you think might be able to be used?
That's what I get for typing in the chat. No, I guess so much of it, but we got hung up with just a data sharing agreement, and so from the early stages. So there, college partners were paranoid about FERPA, and so I would love to see what your data sharing agreement looks like, just so we could get going in that direction. The other, we've had transition counselors, and then one got sick, and then COVID happened, and COVID ate our homework, and we just have a lot of growth that we need in this arena, and it's pretty impressive. Well, it's not pretty, it's very impressive how comprehensive both of your systems are in place for gathering this data and being able to share it with stakeholders. It's extremely, so I'm just gonna, I've got a few days to pick your brain coming up, Kathleen, and I'm just gonna steal everything I possibly can from you while you're here. So,
and John, I'll say that you're absolutely right. Me having the same one counselor consistently for 6 years has made a difference at one campus, because at the other campus, we're on our third individual hiring. And so I have choppy data for them. But for the consistency is huge on having the same individual be able to develop and be able to make improvements.
Well, thank you.
it's huge. Losing our transition counselor to health problems and COVID really knocked the wind out of our sails. So
I'm going to read some of these questions. So Julie is asking if anyone has success using Community Pro or My Journey. So if you're a school that is using that and having some success with that, will you please reach out to Julie in the chat? And then Kathy asks, how do counselors determine student readiness to take community college classes while completing their diploma or equivalency? Does anybody have anything they want to chime in on with that? How are we providing open access? How are we helping students determine their success? How are we supporting them when they're in those classes to be successful?
I'll say real quick, Kathleen, what we do with our counseling class that we offer is we work internally with the adult ed site, and the students that are recommended to the class have to go through the internal process at their campus to have a certain CASAS reading score and to be at a certain level before they're recommended for the class.
Thank you, Emma. Okay, so Kathy, I hope that helps a little bit. And then Michelle asks, can we say more about how we do our data match and the MOU? Yeah, I'd be happy to share the MOU with people. I won't probably be able to do it here, but if you want to put your email in the chat, if you want to, I can share that with you. I'll just email it to you. And then how we do it is, like most of us will do a 5 or 6 point data match for student characteristics. So the name, the address, the phone number, email address, to try to identify that the student is the same. Thank you, Tishelle. I love the idea of tracking touch points. A dual enrollment works really well. Yeah, Burr, I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so the data sharing agreement, I can do that. 5 transitions counselors, that's awesome. And each has been appointed to an adult school. But the data still isn't in place. So lots of interest in the data sharing agreement, which I'm happy to share. Any
Kathleen,
recommendations for Oh,
I'm happy to send that out with the follow-up email from the
oh,
webinar.
okay. Thanks, Cherise. And so curriculum alignment. So I will say that I think we've done a webinar. We've done an administrators forum webinar and collaborative curriculum alignment. So that's something that's archived, Linda. If you want to look at that, you'd be able to see that. And I see lots of interest in getting a data sharing MOU. All right, I'm trying to run through these. If I miss your question, I apologize. Common data between consortium members. Okay, great. All right, so I think I have just a couple of seconds before I need to turn things back over to Cherise. Can you comment on whether you work with students across all the CAPE program areas or specifically ASE, ABE, ESL? So Emma, what would you say? We'd say all areas.
Yeah, all areas. And somebody had a question also about connecting students like adults with disabilities. We do the same. During that assessment with the counselor, we connect them to additional resources at the college, whether it's CalWorks, first year experience, our disabilities program. We make sure they have the resources that they need to be successful.
Thank you. And then I think we are going to, Laura, you're going to put in the chat the links to the high level summary of both of our programs and also to the Atlas research brief. Okay, so that's there. So I'm at 2:58. I can turn things back over to Cherise now. It's you. Thank you, everybody.
I have to say thank you so much to Emma and Kathleen. One of the comments in the chat was you put 9 years into 45 minutes, and it was phenomenal. As I shared with you all when we were preparing this is very much needed by the field. And so I appreciate you both sharing so much about the systems you have in place and what's working, and also what some of the pain points might be as these programs and leaders are looking to think about their post-secondary transitions as well. So thank you so much. This is our quarterly admin forum webinar. I've just put in the chat a request for you to let us know of other future topics that you would want us to include in our next webinar. So please type your responses in the chat for that as well. And several of you were asking where you can find some of our previous webinars. And so I have just put the chat in the link in the chat for that as well. And you can find our previous webinars. They are recorded and posted on our CalPro website, and that link is there in the chat for you. I want to thank you again for joining the webinar today. We look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. And again, I will be here for a few moments as we wrap up today, but please share ideas for what you would like us to focus on in our next quarterly webinar. Thank you again, Kathleen and Emma, and thank you, Laura, for your support as well. Have a great rest of the afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.